everyone. Welcome back to Word of the Rings, and we are here to talk about episodes 2 and 3 of Rings of Power. Joining me, as last time with episode 1, is Pastor Brian. So, hello, Pastor
Hello.
Brian. And today
We're
we're
sadly 1,300 miles apart this time again.
yes, we're now having to Zoom back as we usually do with our Infernal Intercourse episodes because we only manage to meet up fairly infrequently, unfortunately. But at least we have Zoom, and so we can use Zoom now to talk about episodes 2 and 3 of Rings of Power. So in these episodes, we're going to be getting a lot more characters introduced, and but
In
not a
true
whole lot.
Tolkien fashion.
Yeah, lots of
Lots of
characters.
characters.
Yeah. So, Brian, do you have anything you want to say first off before we kind of jump into episode 2?
So I watched that when I first watched it, I watched the first episode and I loved it. And I remember even like Andor, which is one of my favorite things of all time. 2, 3, like that early exhibition part kind of drug me down a little bit, and I started to think, oh, I don't know about this. But that's just storytelling. That's just the part of me that wants it to really get to it, and actually wants it to quit introducing characters. But I just know that that's just going to happen. And there are some cool things coming up in these episodes, but it's a hard part for me to get through. But in general, I do love the whole series. I really do. Yeah.
I think episode 2 does a lot of just like setting up, right? We had episode 1, they obviously want to start with something more flashy, and so we had Galadriel out there and her companions looking for Sauron, and then she gets banished, and so we had a bunch of action, but there's at least 5 storylines they want to support. So we've got elves and dwarves and proto-hobbits and Numenor and the elves and the men of the Southlands. So that's a lot to juggle, and they're only going to have like 8 episodes or so. So you want to get some story told, but you got 5 stories going on. You're going to have to figure out some way to braid them together. And as we mentioned in our episode 1 takedown, it's a little unclear why the men of the South are so worried about elves, because the elves just seem to like walk around and like look at them, kind of give them some shade and then walk off. Doesn't seem like they're taxing them or anything, so whatever. We are told by the showrunners that they're trying to condense a lot toward the end of the Second Age, which you're going to have to do if you don't want to keep having your immortal characters go on and your mortal characters keep dying and having their kids replace them or whatever, So we're kind of getting up to this point where we're kind of compressing a lot of stuff that may have not happened quite so quickly in the summary. And then they have Nikalabeth, which is the story of Numenor.
I hadn't thought about that, but Galadriel annoyed me a little bit at first, the first time I watched it.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, she really did drive that whole episode. That was where everything interesting was. A lot of the interesting things were happening around her. So I hadn't thought about that.
She seems like very one note in a way. She's just obsessed, right? And she's obsessed with finding Sauron. Since she's very blind to almost anything else, to whatever harm she might bring to anyone else. And in a way, that's true to the character, as she is like really, really early in her life. She is the main female rebel who, although she despises Fëanor, is standing up there as leader of the rebels, saying, "Hey, let's leave Valinor. The Valar are trying to keep us here. We want to go find these other lands and rule them or whatever." And she was kind of a firebrand back in her younger days. Of course, by the time you get to the Second Age, at this point, toward the end of the Second Age, when people like Elendil and Isildur are around, she should be been married for a long time. She's got a kid. She's not nearly that person anymore. She's had some time to kind of cool off and learn some wisdom. But in the show, they've kind of kept that. We don't see that she's even looking at any male elves. She's just so obsessed with finding Sauron, and she certainly doesn't seem to have a child. And she seems awfully friendly with Elrond, who's her son-in-law. So it's a little bit weird if you know the books. But so she's cool, and I like her. but sometimes she is a little irritating in that it's like you don't have to be quite so obsessed, like to the point of you are immortal, right? I mean, you are going to have time. Um, and we kind of talk about time a little
Yeah.
bit in this episode, so we can get to that. So in this episode, we have Galadriel swimming. Apparently, she thinks she's just going to swim back to Middle Earth from almost getting to Valinor. And if you haven't read the Silmarillion, at this point in the saga of Middle Earth, the Earth is still flat. Okay, it doesn't become a globe until the end of the Second Age. So at this point, if you're on the very western side of Numenor, where Elendil and his family are from, you can look across the ocean and you can see faintly, very far away, this sort of globe that is Valinor. So the Valar is a gift to the people who supported the elves during the War with Morgoth, gave them this island in the middle of the ocean that's just close enough to kind of spot Valinor, but they're forbidden from sailing in that direction, right? Men are not allowed to go to Valinor. You're just allowed to kind of see it in the far distance. And I guess you can see it in the far distance because there is no curve to the earth, right? You can just keep looking over this flat sea and almost spotting those towers and the great city that's there in Valinor, but not quite, not quite. So at this point, she is swimming. She meets some people on a raft. They don't like her because she's an elf. Apparently, they're from the Southlands, I guess. And of course, we know from the Southlands they all don't like elves because the elves like look at them sideways. And then the sea monster comes conveniently in time to eat all the people except for her and this other guy, Halbrand. Okay,
Yeah,
so
sorry.
we're on the raft, and a sea monster comes and conveniently manages to eat everyone except Galadriel and this one guy, Halbrand. And I did see an interview with the guy, Charlie Vickers, who plays Halbrand, and he was not told anything really about his character for the first couple of episodes. So at this point, he just knows that his character is Mysterious Stranger. Okay, so that's what he's got going for him, and that's how he's going to act it out. So nobody knows, that Halbrand is another character. And I think we guessed by episode 3 or 4 who he was going to be. I don't think it was that big of a surprise. But at this point, even the actor wasn't told. It was just like, okay, you'll be mysterious, and we'll tell you later what's going on with your character. So we don't have a whole lot going on with Galette. She's going to be on a raft, basically, swimming and being in a storm for this. But we do get is the High King Gilgalad, and I'm afraid the guy who plays him strikes me as like a middle manager type. He doesn't really seem like kingly, he seems like a guy who's worried about getting the latest Excel spreadsheet to his boss before the deadline or something. He seems kind of befuddled a little bit, but I don't get a sort of gravitas off of this guy like I'm, someone like Lee Pace in the Hobbit movies, or Hugo Weaving as Elrond in Lord of the Rings. You just sort of get this feeling from them through the screen somehow, and that they are important people, that they know things, or whatever, that they are, they have some kind of authority and seem to just sort of engender sort of authority kind of character. And this guy's not doing it. I don't know if it's not he can't, or that he just wants to play it a different way, or the directors are asking for something different. But he really just strikes me as how he's sort of overwhelmed and can't get enough reports to his bosses in time. But we do see him wanting the impossible from Elrond. I'm going to send you to Celebrimbor. Celebrimbor is going to ask you to build a forge that no one's ever built before, and it's got to be done by spring. And what happens when you've been set the impossible task? Basically, Elrond's been set in a trap. He doesn't know it at this point, and he's going to say, "Hey, I'll go visit my friends, the dwarves." And then we get a scene where I am convinced that at some point, either was this getting filmed during COVID or right before COVID, but there seems to be at some point we're like, we can't have so many people on set, so we're going to have to trim some of these scenes back. the scenes in the first episode where they were going to send Galadriel and her companions off to Valinor, and the High King is there proclaiming that these heroes are going to go off and get this reward, and there's like 15 elves there. I'm like, this seems like you should be in the city where there's a 10,000 elves have gathered to see this singular boon being granted to these great heroes. And instead, it's like, wow, I mean, you collected together like all 15 elves, and so then we get the scene where Celebrimbor and Elrond are walking alone to the doors of Khazad-dûm, and there's no one with them. Like, there's no servants, they don't have any pack horses, there's nobody, there's no security guards or whatever you might need, just functionaries to cook your food. I mean, they should have a whole train load of people accompanying them to Khazad-dûm, because it's not like a 2-minute walk, So they walked alone with no supplies. Neither one of them has any kind of like bag over their shoulder even. It's just like, yep, there's 2 guys walking across the field, gonna knock on this door. And it's like, okay, this seems really weird. Because otherwise, I think we see a lot of the money going into this on the screen, right? You see these gorgeous sets, you see these gorgeous backdrops, so you see all this lovely CGI, and the costumes are amazing, absolutely amazing, look like so detailed, so beautiful. And then we have 2 guys just walking hundreds of miles alone without any supplies. You're like, no, not buying it. But we do then get Elrond and Durin to have, we get introduced to the dwarves. And I don't know if I've ever asked you this, Brian, but I've asked other people when the movies are coming out, like in the early 2000s, I'm like, if you could go to Middle Earth for like, I don't know, 5 or 10 seconds, just to see one thing for real, for yourself, with your own eyes, what would you choose? Where would you go? What would you look at? Do you know what you would look at, Brian?
That kingdom of the elves where they all come together to start off on the quest of the ring.
Oh, say they go to Rivendell, where Elrond is. Okay, so you want to see Rivendell.
Rivendell, that's okay. It. Did I say Elendor? Okay. Yeah, Rivendell.
Yeah, so...
although seeing this, I love Numenor here. I love Numenor in this show.
I'd like to see Numenor for those few seconds.
I don't want to be on it too long.
Yeah.
But
it is our Atlantis. So my brother chose actually Khazad-dûm. He said, I would love to just see it and to understand how the infrastructure would work. We'd have this huge city underground. And I think they kind of show that when we're introduced to Khazad-dûm, you kind of see that they have skylights and they have these huge open spaces and there's lights in various places. And so it is kind of dark, but at the same time, he's at least made it look like it could be like homey and warm and the kind of place you might actually be able to live. They seem to have some infrastructure. Maybe we don't know how their sewer system works or anything, but we don't know how anybody's sewer system works in this world. But I think if you could see Khazad-dûm like that when it was a big city and everybody was working there and it was beautiful, that might be worth seeing. So we do see this lovely city. We had this silly bro contest or whatever between Durin and Elrond, because Durin is mad because Elrond didn't come see him for 20 years. I'm like, okay, this seems like kind of a stretch, but I don't know. What were your thoughts on all this?
Well, and again, yeah, I felt like it wasn't a very compelling plot point. But again, we know that elves live forever. So even if we don't, it's this whole idea of like, well, did you send a messenger to tell them you wanted them there? Did you know what I mean? Just to be like, oh, you didn't,
send the invitation.
In your infinite life didn't come here in the last 20 years, and now I'm going to act mad about it. That was just childish to me. But dwarves are interesting, they're just contrary by nature anyway. But it was a lot of drama over nothing for me. Like I could have cut about a half hour out of that, But
yeah, I'm not sure we had to have the whole contest, or even when it was 4. Like Elrond's like, well, I'm going to invoke the right of blah 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 that gets him into the city. I'm like, okay, I can understand that if he's met dwarves before, he's also relatively old. He was born during the First Age. Maybe he knows about this right of the dwarves, but what is the point? Was it just to get him in the door? I guess. Let's have this rock breaking contest that I know I'm going to lose. Okay, but we do then get introduced to like maybe my favorite character of the whole series, and that's Durin's wife, Disa. Right? She is the best. She's great, and love her from the first time we see her. She just, you know, we've never really seen a dwarf woman before, so and we never really see one in Tolkien. Obviously, they exist. Tolkien says that there's only like one dwarf female for every three dwarf males, which explains why many of them don't have wives or reproduce, because there's very few females. So it's okay, I guess, that we only see many, but the fact that we get to see her and she's so cool, I just love her.
Yeah, and she's wise, and she's, you know, her instincts are right, and you know, it's good. It's the perfect advisor for him, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she seems like a very good sounding board. But yeah, she's intelligent, and she said wise, and she seems to kind of have a good idea what's going on and how to support her husband. Apparently, against his father, they've been having some kind of complication between them. So Durin apparently
stubborn dwarf,
stubborn dwarf thing. So Durin apparently picks fights with more than just Elrond. But then we also are going to introduce the stranger who came down in the meteor from the sky, and of course is found by Nori. Now I did read a couple of episode rundowns about people who are really, really tired of Nori really quickly. Like by episode 2, they're like ready to ditch her and all the rest of the Harfoots. There are several reasons I don't like the Harfoots. I don't know that we get them right here, but I mean, I like her in that she's kind of headstrong and she wants to help people, but she does always seem to make this stupid choice, right? When she's given some choices, she seems to not pick well. I mean, I'm glad that she helps a stranger. I wondered that she didn't like try to, I mean, would be so possible, I guess, to conscript someone else to help, or is it just, I don't know, it just seems like she's always putting all of her friends in danger. Like when we very first see her and she's taking the little kids to some garden that I guess some humans have, and so she's been told not to go there because, you know, humans, and she goes there anyway, and only does she go there, but she takes the little kids with her, you know? So
right.
So she doesn't choose wisely a lot of the time. You know, she just chose to take herself there, that's one thing. Or herself and her friend Poppy, who seems to be of a similar age as her. But no, she takes small children into danger without apparently thinking about it twice. Yeah, you know, that's a little advice.
Well, I was trying to figure out is this clearly presaging, you know, Bilbo and Frodo, who will become, you know, wanderers, contrary to the nature of hobbits too. But also, you know, you're alluding to something that we'll see. I mean, she not only puts people in danger, she causes some harm. You know what I mean? And among her people. Now, I think there's also some moments of rescue that happen because of her relationship with him, but she just tends to like, yeah, I agree with you. It's kind of annoying.
She's a little annoying, but maybe we're supposed to understand she's very young. I don't know.
Yeah.
So her relationship with the stranger is interesting because he has now, you know, at first he can't speak their language. He apparently is starting to learn it by episode 3, and he's starting to say words like friend. But he obviously has some powers he doesn't know how to control. So he kills the fireflies. It's implied that he did something, and the way they had the scene cut together, where he's doing something, and then he breaks a stick, and at the same moment her father's leg snaps. And it's like, okay, the way they spliced that kind of looks like we're implying that this stranger had something to do with that. Not that he knew he would have something to do with it, right? He didn't do it on purpose. But that somehow his power is more powerful.
That was my complaint.
Yeah.
That was my complaint, especially through this middle part, because it's like they had to keep trying, like, is he good? Is he bad? Who is he? We don't know. Could be this, could be that. And I feel like they went too far. Again, it gets boring to me. this whole idea of, well, we're just going to keep you guessing, right?
Mhm.
That gets boring to me.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, most people are guessing this is Gandalf, and it would explain his affection for hobbits later, that indeed he, fell in with the Harfoots and, befriended some halflings long, long ago. Of course, in the Silmarillion and in the books, the wizards are not supposed to come to Middle Earth until somewhere in the Third Age, so he's way early. But I guess there's no reason why the Valar couldn't have sent him a couple of times, in the Second Age and sent him again in the Third Age. I don't know. But again, there's a limited number of things that the showrunners can do without running up against their legal entanglements. So, Gandalf is usable character because he's in the Lord of the Rings. So he is someone you can safely put into your show without crossing any legal boundaries. So we see just a little bit of him then, but then her father, of course, is injured. And this is where I don't like the Harfoots, right? Because they make this big deal about, like,
Yeah.
nobody leaves a trail, nobody walks alone and everything. And even when they have their little, like, prayer for all the dead Harfoots from over the past couple of years, they say their name and then everyone says, "We wait for you," right? As they're all crying because the people, they're like, "No, I don't wait for anybody." You're like, if you fall behind, you fall behind, we're leaving you. So it's like, we have community, except if you are slow, and then screw you. And we'll just weep at you next year
I
when we
thought
read your
that
name out of
was
the book.
I thought that was very, and I tried to figure out what shows that, like, are the point they're trying to make. I can't imagine they overlooked how profoundly they speak this, that we're all together. And then I mean, it was like in an instant, oh, they're going to leave us behind. I thought that was bizarre, and I didn't
Right. And then
know
he,
if
and then
the
you get put in the back, right? It's like, well, you're going to be in the rear because you're
yeah.
injured. So you can just keep going slower and slower until the wolves get you or whatever. And then we'll cry about you next summer. Hope that's cool with you. And so, but then the stranger does actually help push their cart, so they'll be able to keep up. So he's going to earn his keep for a while anyway. But yeah, that's where the Harfords are really not getting into my heart, where they're like, okay, so you talk a good game, but when it comes down to it, you're just going to leave your own kind for no apparent reason. I mean, if they were like currently being chased by people, right? And every time they're caught, the humans string them up or something. And you saw some, proto hobbits hanging from trees, which I guess would be really, maybe too much for the show, but still, if we were at least implied that the humans are hunting them and that right now they are in imminent danger, that might make more sense. That you've got to keep up, the humans are right behind us. But instead, it's like, we're keeping to our little schedule, but we're going to stay here for a few days, and then we're going to have our festival, and then we're going to go, to our next camp. And, watch out for humans. I mean, beware. But they don't seem to be like an imminent threat. So why do we have to leave people behind? I'm not seeing the necessity of that kind of cruelty.
And it was pretty clear. I mean, they acted it. Everyone's looking at each other sideways, so it's like they all immediately knew what it meant, right? It wasn't like a one-off, like, oh, it's just a bad timing thing. This just looked to be like, yeah, this is what we do. We never leave anybody alone unless they become inconvenient.
Yeah, and they're dead. Oh well.
Said to us,
Yeah.
leave your
So
father behind.
and then we have our other thread that in this episode where we're in the Southlands, which will become Mordor. We discovered that by episode 3. That's not really a big spoiler there. And we have Arendir, our elf with Bronwyn, the woman he seems strangely attracted to, even though he says tells somebody, I think in episode 3, that he was born in Valerian. So he's clearly several thousand years old at the very least, not more. Why this particular human woman is really that fascinating to him, I don't know, except for we need to have love triangles or forbidden loves or whatever going on in the show. But they go to like the next town over, and it's gone, right? Because all these tunnels underneath it. So he sends Bronwyn back to warn everyone, and then he goes down and explore the tunnels, and he gets captured. Meanwhile, she goes back home. There's an elf in their house, or an elf. There's an orc in their house, which she manages to behead. So good for her. And since she earlier couldn't convince people to leave, she takes the head of the orc to the bar, to the tavern, and like, well, yep, orcs, and we need to live. And at this point, people are like, okay, we should go. So we have also her son, who is to me, maybe the most annoying character. I don't know if he's supposed to be less than annoying, but teenage boys, I guess, often are. Because he's found this hilt, right? This is clearly evil, and he's bled on it, and so that's going to do something. We don't know what, but his blood.
And he gets more. I guess we're prefiguring the rings or whatever, because he gets more kind of, starts making really stupid decisions because of it, right? So.
Yeah. Yeah, we have a lot of callbacks, I think, for things that happen in Lord of the Rings, because we have this Halbrand character who Galadriel is going to pin as being the lost king of the Southlands, even though we've never even heard of the king of the Southlands. And so you have this sort of like prince in hiding trope that Tolkien used for Aragorn. And then we have these powerful evil things that tempt you, like the ring. So we are seeing the evilness here. But that's the fourth
and
thing.
Lost Kings always have long hair, square jaws, and 5 o'clock shadow too.
Right, because that is part of the contract. If you're a lost king, you're a lost prince, you're going to look a little scruffy, right? But ultimately heroic and masculine, I guess. But those are basically the four threads that they started by the second episode. So see, episode 3 though is where we almost immediately get introduced to Numenor, and I really like the scenes of Numenor. It looks gorgeous. I certainly, if you had to live somewhere in this world, and living in Numenor any other time than this one would be great. It looks like it's a nice, beautiful city, a nice, clean city. It seems to be well managed. And we meet Elendil almost right away. We get introduced to his son, who's kind of dreamy and hears whispering voices that call to him on the wind from Valinor or something. And so he's not able to focus on his duties. But one thing I thought was kind of cool was that in order to give them even a little bit of culture, right? They all get out, pull the ships up on the beach, and they all face the sea. And they all say together, the sea is always right. And it's that's kind of a cool thing, because it gives them a reason to do things. Like Elendil brings, this strange elf woman and this guy he finds on a raft. He's like, well, the sea is always right. And it put them in my path. And that's what he tells, Tarmiriel. It's she's like, why did you even bring this elf here? Elves are forbidden. He's like, the sea's always right. And so, it gives him almost semi-religious reason, right, why he believes that he encountered this elf woman for a reason, and because the sea put her in his path, the sea must want him to do something. And he
I love Numenor, but the people start to act like United States people. They start to think really small and petty, and you know what I mean, and whiny. That again annoyed me, and it does again kind of contradict this nobleness we're meant to understand about them. But I like Numenor a lot.
Well, at this point, Numenor's history, at least the Akallabeth, the line that's Elendil's, they've been on the west coast of Numenor. They can see Valinor off in the distance. They're still faithful to the elves. They learn Elvish as children, so he's able to speak to Galadriel in her own language. They still revere the elves and the Valar. the rest of the island's pretty much fallen away at this point in their history. So, in fact, Sauron in the Alcalaba is captured by the Númenóreans. Captured. He wanted to be captured. And taken back to Númenor, exactly where he wanted to be, and begins whispering in, Pharazôn's ear. And it's at this point where they not only like fall away from the elves, but they fall away from all decency, right? They start like, sacrificing babies and stuff. And so Sauron really has a quite influence on them, but they were ready to be influenced at this point. So the fact that they've fallen from their previous nobleness is true to the Akalabath. That at this point in their history, they, except for that one line that's going to lead to Aragorn, those guys, Elendil and his family, those people on the West Coast, they're still remaining faithful. But the rest of the Númenóreans have kind of dropped the ball at some point in the 3,000 or so plus years of the Second Age. I think about, how long this is supposed to be, right? It's been thousands of years. You think about, time where we're thinking like, oh yeah, well, like Cleopatra was a long time ago or whatever. Well, this would have been like, if you're a Númenórean born, and to see these events, that's nothing. Your ancestors were put on this island, like, way before the, Abraham and those guys are wandering around, Palestine or whatever, like back in the Sumerian times or something. It's a long time. And you have all this history. And then, of course, all the history before that, since you were friends with the elves originally, you've got all this elvish history and everything. Although it is cool that in this episode, I think it's episode 3, where Elendil takes Galadriel to this distant castle where they keep all their law, and you have to ride there on a horse. You don't just have like a law library in the capital, apparently. And she sees that tapestry that shows Elrond and his twin brother Elros. And of course, Elrond, at the end of the First Age, they are tasked by the Valar to choose which bloodline, because they are mixed blood there. They are elf and human, technically angel, and they have to choose. They want to be elf or human, and Elrond clearly chooses to be an elf, and his twin brother chooses to be a human. And then, she actually knew Elros, right? Because she's way older than that. And so, Elendil is a little taken aback when he first realizes, oh yeah, she's an elf. She's old enough that she would have known this guy personally. And for me, he's like 3,000 plus years in the past. But to her, he's some dude that she knew not that long ago. So he kind of gets a little startled there. Was a nice little moment. Oh yeah, you actually would have met him. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So they're trying to get in. I think some of that. This has been a long time. These aren't just places that popped up 100 years ago. These are all ancient places, and even when they were established, even then there was more ancient things. Galadriel's born way before the sun and the moon were even a thought in anybody's mind. So she is like the oldest thing that Elendil's ever going to meet. Really. So, and if we see in the Lord of the Rings, not so much in the movies, doesn't come across too well, but in the books we see that time moves differently around elves. It may be here that Elrond's forgotten to visit Durin for 20 years, and it didn't seem that long to him because he's an elf. But in the Lord of the Rings, when the Fellowship gets to Lothlorien, they count that they were there for 3 days, but when they leave and they look at the moon, they realize they were there for a month. And they're trying to figure out how can it be a month, and the Aragorn's kind of like, don't worry about it. Time moves differently there. What can you do about it? They're elves, And even when they go into Lothlorien, the narration says that Frodo can hear the songs of seabirds whose race had long vanished from the earth. So, you can even hear the calls of gulls, or whatever the seabird is, that are extinct. Have been extinct for ages, as far as you're a person or a hobbit. But if you're an elf, they could still be around maybe, because time is different for you. So the fact that Elrond lives in a city with a bunch of other elves, and maybe time is not slipping by him the same way it slips by Durin, even just the fact that he's immortal, but just that time moves differently, around elves, that it makes it hard for them to kind of keep up with what's going on outside their little time zone. which may be moving not the same rate as everybody else's. So there's a lot of cool things, you can do with the elves. And we do see Elrond being really like kind of fangirling out. He sees Fëanor's hammer. He's like, oh, it's Fëanor's hammer. Of course, if you haven't read anything about Fëanor who, right? So like Fëanor is Celebrimbor's grandfather, who made the Silmarils, who made the Palantir, the Farseeing stones, made a bunch of stuff. He was a great smith. And one of the big reasons why Galadriel and all the others left Valinor to begin with. And so, the fact that Elrond's kind of going, ooh, it's the hammer of Fëanor is on one hand kind of cool, but on the other hand, it's kind of like, if you're not familiar with the whole Lord of the Rings history, you're probably going, oh, who cares, right? But they do try to get a little bit in there. Like, they've mentioned Owly at least 3 times. And Owly is the Valar who made the dwarves. So I think Deese at some point says, like, by Owly's beard or something. And, it's a moment that just goes by and don't really pay attention to it. But clearly, we're going to mention some things like the name of Owly and kind of get that in there for maybe as a fan service. Yep. So at this point, we're beginning to understand.
But yet the hardcore fans are still going to be bitching. So
well, yeah, I mean, I don't know. You can't make everybody happy, and a lot of people seem to want to be unhappy by the show. It's like they're determined to hate it no matter what. It's like, well, that didn't happen, and it's like, well, do they have a legal right to do what you want to happen? Because they might not. There are only certain things they can reference. There's only certain characters they can have, and from there they just have to fill in the blanks or go on their own, because the rest is not theirs to mess with. If the Tolkien estate still owns the rights to it and hasn't sold it, they can't use it. So get over yourself. What can you do? But we do get little snippets, and I do like them. Elrond does mention that his father was Eärendil the Mariner, and that you can see his light in Silmaril in the sky as the evening star. And this is true, right? Eärendil the Mariner was Elrond's father, and he has been tasked with being that morning and evening star, and that Silmaril is on the prow of his ship, the Vingalot. You feel like, is this during COVID? Was this just how far into COVID were we? Because we see like 20 Southlanders, right? There's this little bitty village. At some point, in the next couple of episodes, they're gonna suddenly multiply to be like a couple hundred of them or something. But still, there don't seem to be too many people for the elves really to be that concerned about. I mean, you've had this watchtower of elves like watching these humans for 3,000 years, and for what? Like 2 villages, like 300 people? I mean, is it really worth it? It doesn't seem like there is enough of a population of people. And yet in the crowd scenes in Numenor, I'm sure a lot of it's CGI, but we are clearly picturing Numenor as having thousands of people in it. And there are scenes with lots of humans, and there's definitely plenty of extras in the background that we're not getting in the scenes with the elves, the scenes in the Southlands, So they feel really depopulated past the point of almost outrageousness or ridiculousness. Whereas Numenor seems quite populated in the way that it should be.
So you're in the like that little bar fight, or that every once in a while on Numenor when they're somewhere, it looks all of a sudden like there's only a couple of them, which is funny.
Yeah, we do have Halbrand getting in a fight. Isildur's, messing up everywhere. His dad seems pretty down on him. But at this point, we have in episode 3, Arondir has been captured in the Southlands, and now we discover who's been tunneling under the whole place, and it's orcs. Right, so like the orc that came and broke through the floor of Bronwyn's house. Apparently, that's what they did in that village that was destroyed. So the orcs are now enslaving people to dig more of these tunnels, and they'll discover what those tunnels are for eventually. But for now, we just know that the orcs can't take the sunlight, and that they've got these captured elves and captured humans to do the work out in the sunlight that they can't do. But his elf companions from the Watchtower have also been captured. So apparently not terribly clever elves, because none of them seem to get away. So I guess, we'll say goodbye to them as the orcs kill them off one by one.
That's another moment where I thought, I mean, sometimes I felt in this series that they couldn't decide the nature of the elves, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes the elves are just like you and me, and really in general. I mean, I think compared to like when I watched the Lord of the Rings or read the Lord of the Rings and all that, where the elves are so ethereal and have so much gravitas and gracefully glide along, and here the elves are quite flawed and human in my opinion in certain ways.
Well, certainly
Even like their plan.
Yeah, certainly there are many elves that are flawed. I mean, Celebrimbor seems to have a bit of his grandfather's pride that he is going to make something great, right? He's going to do something. I guess he's got his grandfather's hammer there, and he wants a really big forge that can do a really big fire, and so he can smelt things he's never smelted before and forge things he's never forged before, and be the greatest elfsmith since his grandfather's time. This is where we see like the Hardfoots having their little ceremony, and we see Arendelle being captured and working as a slave by the orcs. So things seem to be moving a little bit more in this episode. This episode 2 to me felt like it was a lot of setup, where we got a lot of exposition. There's a lot of characters we got to get in here. So the only like new thread that really got picked up in the 3rd episode was Numenor, and now we have all 5 threads going. Numenor, Southlands, the Harfoots, the elves, the dwarves. And it's all moving. All the pieces are now engaged. And we'll move off to episode 4 in our next adventure. Do you have any further things you want to discuss about these episodes, Brian?
I do think they did a great job, honestly. Like I said, I get real annoyed with exposition. I know it's necessary, especially in Tolkien, especially with all these threads going. But they do get through it, I guess, quick enough. I just know when I watched that's probably, I guess it was the 2nd episode and even part of the 3rd. I think I turned off partway through the 3rd, but then the 3rd kind of picks up again. So, but that's just normal for me in any series, and I know it's necessary. And I do like all the threads. Like, I don't feel like there's a weak thread. If anything, maybe the Harfoot thread annoyed me the most, but
yeah, I mean, the Harfoots, we like Nori, although she is annoying when she puts her friends in danger. The mystery of who this guy is, we're all guessing it's going to be Gandalf, and maybe they'll pull the rug out from under us, be somebody completely different. I don't know who, but because again, there are only certain characters they can reference, so your pool is limited, or you can just make up an entirely new character, I guess, like we did with Arendir and Bronwyn. So, but the Harfoots, I see them as proto-hobbits. They seem to be kind of hobbity, and we know that the hobbits come from the Harfoots, the Thalahides, and the Stores, so the 3 lineages of the hobbits. So certainly they are eventually going to turn into hobbits. But their culture just seems so cruel that it's hard to like them in a way. They're endearing at the same time. I just want to strangle them all, because it's like, how can you talk about your community and your love of your community and you're holding your people together, and at the same time, for apparently no reason at all, you're like, oh well, you're too slow by. If you're not being chased by wargs at that very moment, I don't know why you have to leave people behind, or why they couldn't just. There's got to be teenagers, right? Send one of the other teenagers back to help them with their wagon. I mean, you can't help this other family. Isn't somebody have maybe one extra strong pair of hands that couldn't help pull the wagon for this dude with the broken leg? I mean, they really don't help each other much. And yet we're trying to portray them as people who help each other. It's just that when push comes to shove, they don't. So I did find that.
That's it. I mean, I can see. Yeah, I can see, living off the land and migrating is hard. And so there are like some matter of fact realities. And so I guess, and I can see maybe they're trying to depict that. But like you said, the hard part for me is just that they rhapsodize about their unity and not leaving anyone behind,
Yeah.
So
At
that
least,
that is what makes them annoying. I mean, maybe they're
yeah,
just not as self-aware as they should be.
yeah. We at least give them a reason to be so cruel in the moment, right? If you're like, hey, we're going to help as long as we can, but if those humans get any closer, you know what we have to do. Sorry. I mean, if there was we really don't want to, we're really agonizing over this decision, but we're all going to get killed by nightfall by humans if we don't leave you behind. Then you'd be like, oh man, they're really grieving over this decision and they really want to stick together. And instead it's like, hey, you're slow, bye. Okay. I hate you for that. But otherwise they're I like them. And I like that there's obviously black Harfoots. That's cool. I even noticed in some of the shots where in Numenor, it's not just there's like black Numenorians and brown Numenorians and white Numenorians. There was like at least one guy who's clearly Asian. And it's like, okay, there's Asian
Yeah,
Numenorians too. So cool. I mean, it's like everybody is represented in this island that of people who were noble at least one time and who were the bright shining stars of humanity, and it encompasses all people, and that's pretty cool. All right, so we will come back for episode 4 for our next adventure in Word of the Rings. And if you want to leave us some comments on how you hated the show, how you love the show, how you think we're completely washed up and completely wrong, but everything we've said here, be our guest. Hit the like and subscribe, or hit the dislike. Still subscribe. That would be great. And we will see you next time.
absolutely.
All right, bye bye.